What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be my response video on overrated albums by you guys. What I would like to do for this video is to plan a top 10 list of albums that are not the very easy, predictable ones, although I would like to read out the other albums that the commenters have shared from my question video on this topic. The four commenters from that video had been Mindful28, Metal Bands Chronicles, Shizazzle, and Tainted Lord 87. Thank you very much to those guys. And before I dive into the list of some of the albums these separate people have selected, I would like to read out the other albums that were not included in the list. Mindful28's list: Nirvana Nevermind, Judas Priest British Steel, Oasis What's the Story Morning Glory, Pearl Jam Vitalogy, Bob Dylan Bringing It All Back Home, Radiohead OK Computer, and yes, Fragile. He also said, I don't think any of these albums are bad, but these artists have better albums in their discography that deserve more acclaim, which I really respect that. Metal Bands Chronicles, Metallica The Black Album, AC/DC Back in Black, Van Halen 5150, Scorpions Love at First Sting, Pantera Far Beyond Driven, Slipknot Volume 3, Killswitch Engage, The End of the Heartache, and Motley Crue Dr. Feelgood. Shizazzle, Motorhead Ace of Spades, Bathory Under the Sign of the Black Mark, Typo Negative Bloody Kisses, Neil Young's Harvest, and the Beatles' Abbey Road. And the last one from Tainted Lord 87, Rage Against the Machine The Battle of Los Angeles. The funniest surprising pick of them all is Limp Bizkit's Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, Linkin Park Hybrid Theory, the aforementioned albums of Oasis's Morning Glory and Metallica's The Black Album. Those are the honorable mentions of albums that were not included in the top 10 list. So let's get started. Number 10 is Fleetwood Mac's 1975 self-titled album from Mindful28. I really think Fleetwood Mac's discography to this point had become such a very instant change musically, and as well as with the now beloved pop era lineup of the band. It was with the pop era that escalated Fleetwood Mac's identity into its standout phenomenon in the band's history. The self-titled Fleetwood Mac album is a really, really great album. And I think the Bob Welch era, which was the previous era, was very underrated, that I enjoy a lot of it. It was like a new birth of Fleetwood Mac's sound that, you know, obviously many people love. I guess you would think this is overrated because of the style of production, or that you don't think all of the songs are like the classic after classic amount of songs, like with the follow-up album after this one, which is 1977's Rumours. Fleetwood Mac's discography had been involving a lot of these different sounds to producers, lineup changes, but this one is definitely one of my most favourite Fleetwood Mac albums. So I wouldn't really think this one is one of those overrated albums. I could have mentioned Rumours as one of the other overrated albums, but that one is still like one of the best sounding, written and produced albums of all time. Number 9 is In Flames The Jester Race, voted by Tainted Lord 87. I almost would have picked the Limp Bizkit album just for comedic effect here. I thought I would put the Jester Race in here, personally because that it's maybe the fact that you prefer some of the latest stuff, like with Clayman, or maybe some of the later changed alternative metal direction of their material, like with Come Clarity and Reroute to Remain. But I always adored The Jester Race, and it is one of my favourite albums of all time. I would also go as far as to say that this is one of my most favourite metal albums of the 90s, and maybe my favourite melodic death metal album of all time. I do adore a lot of the heavy chemistry and the overall hooks and the musicianship that all of these tracks have combined together. That to me features some of the absolute best ever songs that In Flames have created. I am a fan of the melodic death metal period more than most of the later In Flames stuff. Although I did review Foregone, their recent album, when it came out, and I really enjoyed that one. But nevertheless, The Jester Race to me is a standout classic, and I totally respect your pick. Number 8 is Queen, News of the World from Mindful 28. News of the World was quite an interesting selected pick there. I thought that you would pick a Queen album like with A Night at the Opera, or maybe even Innuendo or Sheer Heart Attack. I think News of the World was selected because of, well, like with many of Queen's singles, being monstrously overplayed. But through these tracks on this album, like with We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, there are some songs on this album that I would see as just as great and very much underappreciated. Most of the fans would always pick the aforementioned A Night at the Opera, to also Sheer Heart Attack as well, A Day at the Races, but I really like News of the World. Not a classic album, but to me, not one of those overrated Queen albums. Number 7 is Genesis Foxtrot, again from Mindful 28. I find that Genesis around this time in the band's history stylistically improved, and from what they've done from the previous album that was Nursery Crime, they have finally made their sound to be as achievable, and when I will review Foxtrot, I will have a lot to say because I am a big fan of this album. Besides, you can't go wrong with these standout tracks like with Watcher of the Skies, to Get 'Em Out by Friday, and the monstrous over 20-minute epic that is Supper's Ready. I think it's around the lesser popular stuff on the album that you're maybe not a fan of Mindful 28. Of course, they have made other stellar albums like the gem that is Selling England by the Pound, and the really out there and as adventurous, clever concept album that is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Foxtrot, on the other hand, has definitely been one of the most favourable Genesis albums because of the stylistic change and growing improvements of the band as musicians. So I would say that Foxtrot was like the beginning of their material where they would really shine. Number 6 is Alice in Chains' Dirt. Now this is one album that has been selected that I 100% do not agree with. I know it's your opinion, Shizazzle. It was the one pick that gave me quite a shock. Alice in Chains are obviously not for everybody, but I guess that this style of music for you was like too deep and challenging for you to digest, or that you're not a fan of the band, or maybe respect the band but never really thought of them as one of the greatest bands of all time. Dirt to me features some of the greatest guitar tones from Jerry Cantrell and these brutal, bleak and heavily powerful, vulnerable, emotional lyrics through many of the album's tracks, like with Rooster, Down in a Hole, Would be my favourite Alice in Chains track. But I think Dirt is never one of those albums that I would see as overrated. As much as I do love this album, I had to put this one in the list. Now, number 5 is an album that's been selected twice by Tainted Lord 87 and Metal Band's Chronicles. Number 5 is Sepultura Roots. I do understand that loads of people either like this album or to say comments that are indifferent, because I know some people who don't like this album. It's around the trend of the new metal scene through different bands, like with Slipknot, Snot, Korn, Cold Chamber, etc. To follow up Chaos AD was, to me, like at a different approach that I have always really liked. I love the album anyway because of the nostalgia. It's intensely percussive as well, and yes, it has a different style of production done by Ross Robinson, who produced albums for the aforementioned Korn and Slipknot. But it was with a style of music that some people would not be interested in at all. I always loved Sepultura. Chaos AD is my favourite. It's no surprise at all that many of Sepultura's fans would stick to the previous classic Max Cavalera era of albums, like with Arise and Beneath the Remains. But with Chaos AD being their magnum opus, to me, I really grew to love how different instrumentally and as separate Roots was. It was an album that was quite like either a digestible album for different fans or the style of music that they would not be interested in at all. By the way, I'm one of those Sepultura fans who grew to like and appreciate the very underrated and respected Derek Green era. Number 4 is Megadeth Euthanasia by Tainted Lord 87. I always love this album as well. Besides, loads of the Megadeth fans would praise Countdown to Extinction and the masterpiece that is Rust in Peace. I haven't reviewed all of their albums yet, so I won't say a lot. I did review this album, but what I have said from my review more than a few years ago to now is that I think it is one of my most favourite albums in their discography. It was obviously through the change from being thrash metal into heavy metal, as Countdown to Extinction was obviously the first album where Megadeth's sound and style had changed, like with Metallica, of course, with the Black Album. Euthanasia to me is terrific, full of the energy and catchiness, excellent vocals and incredible production, the original production, by the way. And I also would have to give credit to Dave Mustaine because his vocals on this album are at his best. At least that's what I think. But yet Megadeth have made albums that many fans would say are better than others. The albums from number 3 to number 1 have been voted by Shizazzle, although Metal Band's Chronicles agrees with Shizazzle's number 1 pick. Number 3 is Metallica Ride the Lightning. It's one of those albums that is like a neck-and-neck battle type of conversation for most Metallica fans to pick either this album or Master of Puppets. I find that Ride the Lightning is as a significant improvement through speed, musicianship, the chemistry that is growing Metallica's own performances to become as even more of an electrifying band. You can't go wrong through these other Metallica tracks on some of the songs on Master of Puppets and Unjustice for All, but with Ride the Lightning, I have cherished Fight Fire with Fire as my favourite Metallica opening on any of their albums, to the emotional, moving and powerful Fade to Black. The track The Call of Cthulhu is a masterpiece. So I think Ride the Lightning could have been another one of those albums that so many people would think is overrated, but most of the time they would probably select the Black Album or Master of Puppets. Number 2 is Nirvana In Utero. In Utero, as the final album from one of the most influential bands of all time, is another stellar achievement. Part of the reason why I love this album so much, it is really because of how in your face, dirty, grimy, and just like this monstrous catastrophe of sound that Nirvana did create for this album. Kurt and company didn't want to make another album like what Nevermind had become. Therein lies that choice, that the band wanted to make an album that is nothing like Nevermind. And I think some of the comments you said, Shizazel, are based around the overall sound of the album. You prefer Nevermind, but I find with In Utero, it features some of the band's absolute top best pieces of their songwriting and songs entirely. I always loved Heart-Shaped Box to Dumb, Rape Me, All Apologies, Penny Royalty. It is not as an easygoing album because of the sound of Kurt Cobain's tortured wreckage of his voice, the extreme vulnerability, and the darkness of the lyrical content perfectly fits this overall vibe of what this album had become in the first place. The late great Steve Albini's production for this album was just perfection. It's obviously noticeable in its difference through the mixing and sound, not only as a punishing, rough around the edges and in your face album. I will definitely see this one as one of the other most favourite rock albums of the 1990s. Number 1 is Black Sabbath Paranoid. As mentioned by Shizazel and Metal Bands Chronicles, Paranoid by Black Sabbath is not only a groundbreaking achievement that continued the growth of what was then a controversial take of making music at the time in the 70s. Paranoid is celebrated from when it was released over 50 years ago to this very day, highly influential. People would maybe see this album as overrated because of the constant radio airplay of the main songs of Paranoid and Iron Man, with songs that have been played constantly along with other bands' hit singles from Queen, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Doors, etc. These songs have been recognisable, but at the same time, they are great songs. I grew tired by hearing Iron Man all the time anymore, but when I listened to Paranoid as a whole from start to finish, from the entirety of the album, it's just as a monumental and essential listening. War Pigs to Planet Caravan, Hand of Doom, Fairies Wear Boots. It's just an album that defines Sabbath at one of the best ever strengths through the tone of the band, through vocal melody, the blistering guitar solo work, through the riffs as well as the rhythmic drumming, the rumbling bass. This was heavy metal at one of its absolute top best. It would be a common pick to call this one as overrated. It used to be my favourite Black Sabbath album because of its powerful significance, and it still is remaining as significant to this day. Although my favourite is Sabotage, which that album is going to be turning 50 years old. But I get it that people would select Paranoid as one of the overrated albums. So that is it, guys. That's the list of the top 10 overrated albums of all time by you guys. This has been absolutely fun to do. I would like to make more of these music question videos so that any of you guys would like to participate and joining in by sharing different comments. Let's keep this fun going when I will be thinking about some more of these types of videos, and then I would like to respond to your comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I will keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.